Even if you're on track with your savings and have a clear idea of what you want to do in retirement, there is one more component that most people miss: their health. If you want to have a long retirement, your health is key. That's why in this episode of the podcast, I talked with Dr. Aleksandra Gajer about how you can optimize your most important asset, your body. My guest today is Dr. Aleksandra Gajer, a board certified physician, best selling author, and the founder of the Gajer Practice, along with two other ventures. She specializes in hormone optimization, weight management, and peptide therapy to help people reach peak physical and cognitive performance. Through her root cause, precision based approach, Dr. Gajer works with folks who have achieved financial freedom but are now ready to optimize their most important asset, their body. Her programs target energy, metabolism, hormonal balance, and brain function to build resilience and sustainable vitality so that they can live through a long and enjoyable retirement down the road. Welcome to the show, Aleksandra.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
It's as I mentioned before, I hit record. After 230 plus episodes, it's kind of hard to come up with new topics. But I think this is an important one and tangential to financial freedom, because what good is financial freedom and independence if and being able to have a great retirement if you don't live to enjoy it? So along with your work, people's work to save towards retirement, establish financial freedom and independence, they need to be working on their health and their bodies so that they can enjoy that retirement once they get there. So great to have you on the show to talk about that. We have a lot to talk about. Achieving your financial freedom and saving successfully for retirement are one thing, but making sure you live long enough to enjoy it, as I said, is another. So I guess my first question is, in general, where you see the health of the average American and how much it needs to improve overall to ensure a long retirement.
That's a great question. And, the average American, about 60% of Americans have at least one chronic illness before, as we enter our fifth, sixth decade of life. So a lot of the individuals I work with are actually people who have achieved financial freedom, who've achieved a lot in their career, and now they're ready for the next phase, but there are a number of things holding them back, or they don't have the vitality in their body to enjoy the next phase, to perhaps work on the projects or travel or do whatever it is that they need to do. And I think the science that has been available over the last decade tells us that this is actually far more in our control than we realized in the past. And certain simple strategies for our lives can determine what the sixth, seventh, eighth decade of our lives are going to look like. And what you're doing in your 40s is going to determine what you feel like in your 60s, and what you're doing in your 50s will determine what's going on in your 70s. And we now have some very clear guidelines and research that can give people a blueprint of what you can do to invest in those later decades of your life and really enjoy it and enjoy the fruits of your labor and the hard work.
Mm-hmm. Well, in the intro, I mentioned the target of your programs: energy, metabolism, hormonal balance, and brain function. So let's talk about each one of them. First, let's talk about energy, first on the list. If you want to be active in retirement, you need to have it. So, what
Absolutely.
can people do to live with energy and purpose, not only as they approach retirement, but while they're in retirement?
Yes. Great question. Energy is so vital, and a lot of people lose that energy that we might have had at a younger age. So, the foundation of most of what I do is something called metabolic health. And the word metabolic relates to your metabolism, which is basically what happens to food after you put it in your mouth. And we all know those people for whom they can eat anything and they stay lean. And then there's some people who are really trying and they're working hard and they're making good choices, but somehow that food is getting turned into that fat tissue that we don't really want around. So a healthy metabolism is really the key to energy and longevity. You know, the number one cause of death in the US is heart disease, and the number one risk factor for heart disease is an unhealthy metabolism or metabolic health. So, this doesn't, you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to, eat salad at every meal. But what I usually tell people is we need to have a foundation of eating mostly whole foods, eating real foods. That means eating what your grandmother might have cooked 40, 60 years ago for dinner before we had all these processed foods that are way more convenient and often really what I call hyper palatable, means they're so good that you can't stop eating them. So, real food, trying to get enough protein in, enough vegetables in, having a foundation of, a lot of diet culture has been around how to get ourselves thinner and skinnier. And what I really try to work with people is how to nourish our bodies because we need the fuel from food. And there are certain strategies that can really turn on your metabolism and turn food into fuel. And I think that's the foundation of energy is trying to eat balanced meals, get enough protein, trying to not eat after dark when possible, trying to stay away from the processed foods. I'd say about 85% of the time, life comes with celebrations. Life comes with time when you want to celebrate with food, with alcohol, and that's good. We need that. We need to be able to enjoy life and feel good. But if 85% of the time you're actually putting things into your body that your body needs for nourishment, you will find a healthier metabolism, which is a real investment in your energy now and later.
Well, are there any particular daily rituals that people can develop? Because it's habit, right? You need to change your habits about food and eating and exercise and everything else. So, and habits form over time. What kind of rituals can people start creating to establish those better habits and really adjust their metabolism?
That's the great question. I think one of the most important things is starting your day with a protein-rich breakfast. It really tunes up both your brain health and your energy for the rest of the day. So, eggs are great for that, Greek yogurt, and trying to get 20 or 30 grams of protein at breakfast will really change what your focus, your creativity, what your body will feel like for the rest of the day. And then trying to make sure that you have some protein and vegetables at every meal. And I usually tell people eat the protein and vegetables first. If there's something else on your plate, you could eat that next, but don't fill up on the carbs first. Do the protein and vegetables. And then, sometimes we have to trick ourselves. We can't tell ourselves you can't have that at all. It's just, I have to eat this first. You have to treat yourself like an 8-year-old. You
Yeah.
eat the stuff first, and then you get the treat.
Well,
So I
Well, eating that protein, I mean, I was a child of the silent generation that got through the Depression, and I was always told, well, you can't eat everything, eat the meat,
Right.
because that was the most expensive thing. So they didn't want that to go to waste. So, yeah, protein at breakfast. I'm hearing bacon. Everything's better with bacon. So that's good.
Everything
Some good, healthy rituals there. And you have to have realistic and high impact changes to make a difference, right? For something sustainable. So I guess that high impact is sort of uh, limiting your portions and prioritizing what you eat in what order. The proteins and the vegetables first.
Yes, yes, I think that's really important and very high yield. There's been a lot of studies recently about muscle, and protein is really important for muscle building. And there's a few interesting ones. One that recently came out that said that out of all the possible factors that could determine if someone lives through a cancer diagnosis, they looked at a number of different factors. The number one factor was how much healthy muscle you had before you were diagnosed. So the people with a healthy, lean muscle, the people who are eating protein, walking, exercising, those are the people most likely to survive cancer. Those are the people least likely to get dementia. So protein is really good. It's nourishing. but it also helps build that healthy muscle, and it's more filling than, carbs, which kind of leave your body very quickly. So prioritizing those things, trying to eat mostly when it's light outside, which is much easier in the summer months. In the winter time, there's some wiggle room there, of course.
Kind of has to be.
Yeah, it has to be, but trying to stop eating by about 7 p.m. Is really healthy, 7 or 8 p.m. And also walks after meals can be a really high yield activity or habit that again improves longevity, improves your overall health. What you want is for your body to process the sugars or the breakdown products of what you ate. And if you walk within an hour of a meal, you have a lot less of sugar hanging around, and you tend to process things better, manage your weight better, have better metabolic health.
Hmm. Well, before we move on to the next one, we've talked about diet and exercise, but I think also one of the problems that I kind of have with my energy levels is getting enough sleep and really, getting into a good sleep regimen, going to bed at the right time, getting enough sleep every night. Could you talk a little bit about that, about the importance of a good, sleep cycle and sleep habits?
Absolutely. Yes. So yes, metabolic health is foundational. You need the movement, you need the food, but sleep and stress management are sort of the next two pillars that are non-negotiable. So you need sleep in order to repair your cells, to repair your body from everything that has happened during the day. And really, aging happens and chronic diseases happen when we don't have that time period to repair. So, and I often talk about sleep. We work on our diets. We try again each day and try different strategies to make things better. And you can do the same with sleep. You know, it's challenging, and our attachment to screens often makes it hard. But if you can try to go to sleep around the same time each night, if you can try to be away from screens, not looking at screens for an hour before bed, do some sort of wind down activity like reading or talking with someone or whatever it is that you do before going to bed, trying to save that last hour, not looking at a screen really impacts the depth of your sleep. Sleeping in a dark environment is also very helpful. Blackout curtains, making sure there's no light, no TV, because that impacts your hormones and the chemicals that your brain is producing and how deeply you'll get to sleep.
Hmm.
Um, Having the room cool, all those things are sort of little factors that you can adjust and see how it works for you, and work on getting deeper sleep. And sometimes there are hormonal and metabolic health issues that are interfering with sleep, and we need to think about some medications or supplements to either reduce stress hormones at night, because some people get into bed and they feel tired but wired. You're tired, your body's ready to go, but your brain is still kind of working things through. And a lot of times that's because your stress hormones are still elevated.
Hmm.
And like cortisol, we all have heard of cortisol, which is the big stress hormone that causes you to gain weight. And sometimes it's supposed to go down at night, but because of our lifestyles, it doesn't. And you get that tired and wired. I have a few herbal favorites. There's something called L-theanine, very safe. You can get it over the counter, and it just reduces your cortisol levels at night or during the day. It actually helps. You're still focused, you're not sedated, but for that tired and wired, there's a number of supplements that you can take and um, try to improve your body's ability to fall asleep.
Hmm. And there's technology that can be used too to help with that. I use it as well, not always as effectively as I'd like to, but I have an iPhone and an Apple Watch, and you can set that up to say, all right, this is my bedtime, and then based on that bedtime in advance, it'll blank the screen on your watch. It'll go into a different mode on your phone, where it kind of shuts down and doesn't, it's not as bright and things like that, and helps you to avoid that kind of blue light and stimulation that you can have at bedtime from these devices. and maybe that people can look into those settings on their technology. I'm not in the Android world. I'm sure there may well be a similar thing for that, but look into ways of your technology leveraging that and forcing you to walk away from it and go to sleep.
Yes.
So one more thing I want to get into before we move on, because the next one's metabolism, but we've already talked a lot about metabolism and how it affects energy. But another thing that can affect energy is burnout. And I'm a lawyer and you're a physician, and I'm sure both of us are familiar with stress and burnout in our professions and a lot of other professions. How do we address burnout and fatigue and brain fog and things like that that can cause some dysregulation and interfere with energy and metabolism?
Yeah, another great question. And yes, burnout is so prevalent. We're kind of living in a culture that burns a candle at both ends. And I probably, like yourself, have some personal experience with burnout. I was an ER doctor for 10 years before I started my practice. And I was an ER doctor during COVID. And we collectively suffered quite a bit of burnout, and I think that it's a tough place, and I think burnout happens when we stop taking the time to care for ourselves, or maybe the time stops being available to take care of ourselves at sort of a foundational level. There is a hormonal dysregulation that happens with burnout where our cortisol levels can be very high, but often after a period of very high stress, hard work, our cortisol level actually crashes and your body stops making an appropriate amount of cortisol. And at that point, you just don't have any energy. You feel wiped out. It's hard to get inspired. So I think if someone is facing burnout, the foundational things are foundational. So again, trying to create space for yourself and sleep, trying to eat the right foods, getting rid of sugar crashes. But I think there's also some intentional things we can do to counteract the effect that stress has on our bodies.
Mhm.
And that's different for every person. So for some people enjoy breath work or some kind of slow movement. For other people, walks in nature can be really positive. But we have this sympathetic nervous system, which is the fight or flight, which is often very much on overdrive when we're in high stress periods. But we have the other system, which is called the parasympathetic nervous system, and that's our rest and digest system. And there's a number of exercises and techniques to turn that on purpose. And I think if,
Mhm.
if people are experiencing burnout or they are on that side of work where things have really become overwhelming, trying to find some way to every day turn on that parasympathetic nervous system, whether that's um, doing some breath work, to taking a walk in nature, connecting with someone that you love, making sure to set time aside for that.
Mhm.
But in addition to that, I've worked with a number of lawyers, executives, people who have real deal burnout, and we need to, and a lot of those people have hormonal dysregulation, and a lot of times we do need to give you back some medication or some supplements, something to support your body to start kind of nourishing and feeding you again, and getting that sense of vitality back into your life. And it's complicated when people can't get out of the situation that's causing the burnout,
Mhm.
but but I still think that there are ways to manage it where you can kind of get back to feeling like yourself. A lot of people I work with in burnout come in and say, I just don't feel like myself. I can't put a finger on it. I don't know exactly what's wrong, but I just no longer feel like the person I was 5 years ago. And the drive and the excitement I had about what I'm doing, it's just I can't find it again. It's misplaced. Um and sometimes the body just needs a level of support that's hard to get when you're working like that.
And I think it's really, for me, in dealing with stress, it's stress that leads to burnout. And it's being able, I think a lot about what you're talking about and what people need to consider is you need to leave it at work. I mean, some jobs are just stressful while you're there. You don't really bring that home. But like physicians, lawyers, you come home and that stress is still with you and you need to transition. I'm not at work anymore. I'm at home. And that physical and mental transition where you leave that stress at work, would you say building rituals and things like that, things like box breathing and other things that can help you to transition so you leave that stress at work and you're less susceptible to burnout?
Absolutely. Yeah. One of the things that I noticed that I was doing that was not helping me was bringing the laptop to bed and
Oh,
continuing to work. So I had to
not
make
good.
a rule of no working in my bedroom. Um, and I think that, that really helps. Sometimes you just have to treat yourself like a kid and say, hey, this is the rule. We're not working in bed during the wind down period. There'll be there'll be time to get to it tomorrow.
So we talked about the interaction of energy with metabolism, and we talked a lot about metabolism. Is there anything else you want to talk about with regard to metabolism before we move on, or have we pretty much covered that?
I think we've covered it. Yeah, let's
Okay.
talk about the other things.
Okay. So next is hormonal balance, and we talked before the show, before I hit record, that people talk about hormonal balance, and with obviously there are changes with women as they go through menopause, whether perimenopause changes or postmenopausal changes, but it's really something for both men and women, right? These changes as you get older, there are changes in that hormonal balance. So, talk to me about that and how that affects overall health and longevity.
Yeah. So I often find, both men and women have hormonal issues, and sometimes I find it's easier for women to come in and talk about their hormones because they're sort of expected to have those issues, whereas more men suffer in silence. And I work with a lot of women who, feel so much better, and then they say, "Could I bring my husband in?" And I'm like, "Yes, please. Let's get your husband in here and let's see if we can get him feeling better too." But so I'm going to start with men. Actually, I'm going to start with both men and women. So, when we think about hormones, we often think of what are called sex hormones, which is estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, but that's not the only hormones we have. So, going back to metabolic health, the most important hormone we have in our body actually is insulin. And that is related to how we process food, our energy levels. Insulin also sends the signal to store fat. So, we want to keep our body as sensitive to insulin as possible. When we become insulin resistant, that's when your body starts pushing out more insulin and telling your body store fat, and it makes you tired, makes you prone to illness. So that's kind of our foundation for everyone, and that's touching back on metabolic health. And the strategies we talked about, eating whole foods, eating protein, walking after dinner, all that makes you insulin sensitive. And you can have your doctor check your fasting insulin. Ideal is somewhere around less than 6. It's a very easy, cheap blood test to get, but you will feel your best if your fasting insulin is around less than 6 and your body can actually use food as fuel.
Mm-hmm.
And so once we have the insulin and the metabolic health, then I look at cortisol too, which is our stress hormones. And we talked a lot about that. And there are both pharmaceutical and natural ways to get the cortisol in balance and make sure that your adrenal glands are producing enough cortisol to keep you awake, feel good without feeling that burnout, tired and wired, and all that stuff. And then I look at thyroid in everyone, and there are more women who have thyroid issues than men. But again, it's something that's sometimes overlooked in men. And people who have thyroid issues have trouble losing weight. They may get dry skin, constipation, fatigue, depression. So there's a lot of issues, and sometimes it can be subtle. And we want to make sure the thyroid is working as well as possible. And then we get to the hormones that we think about most of the time. So that's a foundation that I build for men. And then we look at testosterone and growth hormone. Those are the two that I think are important in men. And men go through something called andropause, which is basically you start producing less testosterone than you did in your youth. And That means that you are no longer able to build muscle as efficiently with the same amount of exercise.
Mhm.
Often men feel like they have less drive. And we often think about drive when it comes to sex drive, but drive off is a lot more than that. It's drive to do your job. It's drive to go out and make new connections. It's basically drive to do the things that you enjoy in life. And men often also get sleep issues, mood issues, bone health starts to decrease. And actually, there's been some startling studies that we're seeing men develop low testosterone at much younger ages than we used to. So the average 35-year-old now has a testosterone level that a 60-year-old would have had 40 years ago.
Hmm.
So we're seeing most men have an average level that's just much lower than their fathers and grandfathers would have had. And that's related, most of the studies are suggesting that that's related to some of the microplastics in our food and some of the other chemicals in our food that just really jam up the testosterone production in men. And so I think that if men are suffering from fatigue, lack of energy, lack of drive. Again, sometimes it's just this vague, I don't feel like myself. I don't enjoy the things I used to. And there's a lot of doctors that'll try to give you some Zoloft for that. But I think it's worthwhile to check a testosterone level. And we have some natural ways to improve testosterone in men, as well as great ways of supplementing it. Um, but it can be really worthwhile. And even though I see a balance of men and women, I feel like the men that I see have been some of my biggest success stories and the ones who've worked the hardest to sort of do the lifestyle stuff to support everything else that we're doing and have just had these incredible results in the sixth, seventh, eighth decade of life that have been really cool to see.
Well, you talk about the 35-year-old is having lower testosterone than a 60-year-old. I guess in a perfect world or in a natural world, I mean, when can men and women expect to start seeing these changes? At what age should they start thinking about these hormone levels, assuming things take their natural course?
Yes. So most of the time, I would say 35 is probably around the age that things can start changing, which is pretty young. Most of the time, I don't see people until they're 45 or 50. But I saw a 29-year-old recently who was a military, who was active military, and that level of stress can sometimes impact hormonal function and drive hormones really out of whack. So most of the time this happens after age 35, but it really depends. And, I think if you're feeling good and then you're around 50 and things are changing and you don't have the drive to go work out or, you're not building muscle or losing fat even though you're doing the right things, or you're just not feeling quite right. That's a time to get checked out, get some labs checked, see if you have the hormones support our bodies to do what they're supposed to do, and you want to know if you no longer have that hormonal support. I often tell both men and women that giving you back your hormones allows your body to tune in to the good inputs that you're doing. So I still need you to eat well. I still need you to exercise. I still need you to work on stress and sleep. But what you do is going to have a much bigger impact if you have the right hormone levels in your body.
We may have already covered it, but I just want to make sure for our listeners that, just some quick practical tips on how to make sure that you're maintaining proper hormone levels at any age, really.
Yeah. So again, nourishing the body and making sure that we're getting enough protein. Most men and women need between 80 to 100 grams of protein a day. This
Mhm.
depends on your height, your level of activity. There's a bit of a range, but most people get actually a lot less than that. So
Mhm.
protein is really important. The other thing that we don't often talk about is the fact that having healthy fat is critical to making hormones. So eating things like nuts and avocados and olive oil. Um, People who are on very low fat diets tend to have very low hormone levels because all hormones are made from fat. So
Mhm.
we have to have some fat in our diet, some healthy fats in order to make hormones. And you need to be sleeping. A lot of hormones are made at night. It's just the way it is. And if you're not getting sleep, if you're not getting restful sleep, then it is very hard to maintain normal hormone levels.
Mhm.
And exercise, actually, particularly strength training,
Mhm.
supports more normal hormone levels in both men and women. So, strength training can sound overwhelming, but that can just mean putting on a weighted vest when you walk or using some dumbbells and at home and doing a few reps of that or working with a trainer. But again, we want to build that healthy muscle because healthy muscle improves your hormone levels and protects you from dementia, from heart disease, from cancer. So it's really after your financial currency, I would say that healthy muscle is the most valuable currency you can have as you enter the last several decades of your life.
Well, it's interesting you say that all hormones are created through fat, and I guess really paying attention to that food pyramid, and people say, "Oh, you got to avoid fat or whatever." Well, like anything else, with a proper diet, it needs to be balanced, and you need to have a certain amount of fat. And if you're cutting back fat, you need to be aware that that could affect your hormone levels.
Yes. Yes, and fat is calorie dense, so that's why we've always gotten the guidance that you should eat less fat.
Mhm.
Um, both carbs and protein have 4 calories per gram, whereas fat has 9. So you
Mhm.
just get a little more calories out of it. But it's also very filling, and the right sources of fat can still allow you to maintain a healthy weight and can fuel your brain and your hormones in important ways. So,
Mhm.
yeah, so we spent many decades totally villainizing fat, and I'm here to say fat is back.
Fat is back, baby.
Fat is back.
Okay, well, let's get on to the last one, brain function. I think brain function kind of touches on the proper amount of sleep and things like that. But how does that come into play with maintaining good health, energy, all the stuff we talked about before and during retirement?
Right. Yes, and brain function is so crucial. And again, a lot of the foundational things are important for brain health. Exercise is actually the biggest predictor of whether someone will get dementia or not. And our brain cells are very sensitive to oxygen, to the amount of oxygen we get. So when you're exercising, you're pumping blood with oxygen through your body at a faster rate than you would be otherwise. And our neurons, the cells within your brain, are so sensitive that if they don't get that input of extra oxygen, they die.
Mhm.
So the people who are doing some walking, who are exercising at least 3 to 4 times a week, those are the people who are maintaining all their neurons and the strength up there. So, I think exercise is the number one thing you can do, making sure that you, again, maintain healthy muscle. That's another important part of preventing dementia and keeping your brain sharp, managing stress and managing sleep. There's one interesting blood test that I think is sometimes worthwhile, and it's a genetic blood test that most doctors won't check, but it's for something called an ApoE gene. And there are some people who have, and the test result will give you a number. You're either going to be a 2, 3, or a 4. The threes are kind of normal. The fours have a higher risk of Alzheimer's and dementia, and for them, saturated fats are actually really dangerous.
Mhm.
So those are people who need to be a little more careful with their fat intake, with their cholesterol, and there is more specific strategies to address brain health for people who have that gene. And then people who have the two actually do better when they have more fat, and it's more protective for their brains, and they're protected from heart disease and brain disease a little bit more. So there are interesting tests and nuances that you can get into when it comes to brain health that can give you a little bit more of a personalized plan to take care of your brain. But I think the most important thing is remembering that your brain, it depends on the rest of your body. I've had some patients who are extremely accomplished and they've worked with their brain their whole lives and maybe they didn't feel that exercise and movement and food was as important because their intellectual work was so fulfilling. But it's just remembering that that organ can't survive if you're not feeding your body well, if you're not moving, if you're not getting the right nutrients from vitamins, and if you're not getting enough sleep, and if you're not being somewhat intentional about how stress is affecting you.
Mhm. Well, also, just keeping your brain active, I would think. I mean, I don't know whether it's a myth or not, but people that regularly do crossword puzzles and things like that that can maybe fend off Alzheimer's and other brain-related things. I know, every morning because I Apple News on my iPad has I can do two crossword puzzles, a Sudoku puzzle, and it really kind of I go through like four or five puzzles as part of my morning routine. Do you think that kind of brain work or using that brain to solve puzzles can help as well as diet?
Yes, yes, I think yeah, that's fantastic. With the brain as well as a lot of functions in the body, it's use it or lose it.
Hmm.
So it's very important to keep ourselves engaged, especially as people near retirement, make sure we're not spending too much time sitting in front of a screen. And challenge is so important. The body, when we talk about stress, all challenge is a level of stress, but finding that right level of stress to keep you growing and active is kind of the key. And absolutely, you use it or lose it. So find fun ways to take care of your brain health every day and do those puzzles and stay active, have interesting discussions with people. All that is super helpful.
And learn new things.
Yeah.
My wife and I, we're already thinking, we're not that far away from retirement, and saying, what are we going to do? And we're thinking about maybe signing up for master class, like learn new stuff, take classes, always be learning. And that's, I mean, not everybody's like that where they're intellectually inquisitive, but if you are, keep it up. Seems to be another way to keep those brain cells active.
Yes.
So, great way of looking at energy and health from these different perspectives. If any listeners out there who say, "Wow, that's kind of interesting. Maybe Dr. Geyer can help me." How can people reach out to you, and what kind of services do you offer folks?
Yeah. So I can work with people nationwide. I can see people in our offices that are in Northern Virginia, just outside of DC. But if you're not in the area, I work with people through telemedicine. Our website is called thegajerpractice.com. That's Gajer, the Gajer Practice. And when you go onto that website, there's a button that says book a free introductory call. It's always a great place to start, just to talk through your situation with someone. And we're pretty easy to work with. You can book an appointment with me. We can talk about how we can help optimize your health. And there are incredible tools available now that really can change what your life will look like now, but also in 10 years and 15 years, and making sure you have a retirement that's filled with vitality and where you're thriving and you're able to enjoy the fruits of your labors.
Mhm. Well, that's great, and I'll put all of that into the show notes. So if you're listening in your car on your way to work, don't worry, you don't have to write this stuff down. Please don't. Uh, so get back, check out the show notes, reach out to Dr. Geyer. She can be of help to you. I know I've learned a lot about health and maintaining health, and I didn't know that fat makes hormones. So all sorts of interesting stuff. So thanks for coming on the show, Doctor, and telling us all this stuff about how to maintain good health so we can really enjoy a long retirement.
Thank you so much.